Like Megan said, I work at the Fire Sciences Lab in Missoula, Montana. I've been involved with LANDFIRE since pretty much its beginning. I've been a major user, consumer, and abuser of the data. Um, I currently, my role at the Fire Lab is I oversee the FlamMap um, Geospatial Fire application, which is highly dependent on the LANDFIRE geospatial data for the fuels information to develop landscapes so we can use the application. So my focus today is to focus on using the LANDFIRE data viewer to download data to get directly into FlamMap. The same landscapes that are used in FlamMap are also used in the LANDFIRE decision support system, although they supply that data differently within that enterprise system. And then the interagency fuels treatment decision support system. If I got that acronym right, I know Carolyn and Nicole can correct me on that. They also are highly dependent on LANDFIRE data within their system. So these, I'm just going to talk about some things about using that data, show some things about the data, and then try to be short to leave it to more for discussions and more questions that folks might have. So with that, I'm gonna kill my camera and just go straight into it. So here we're on the main LANDFIRE data page, and most of the stuff I'm gonna reference and talk about today is gonna come out of the data products section, which has lots of links into it. And I'm not gonna go through every link and where they take you to, but if you're not familiar with it, I would suggest going there, looking at those links and seeing what information is in there. I'm going to pull from it from time to time, but I'm not going to, my intent is not to teach how to use the LANDFIRE webpage. I'm going to go first to this data distribution map viewer, because this is how we're going to pull data. And when it opens up, it's going to open up to a CONUS view of the United States. And again, I'm not going to talk about how to navigate and get around in it. I know that there is, I probably won't be able to find it, but I know they have, if you hover all these buttons, they'll give you information about how to use everything and navigate around. And I know somewhere on here in the help, I think there's information on tutorials like how to get data, how to download data using the JSON method, and how to get using it. Otherwise, they have instructions on how to use it, but I'm just gonna free form it here. So
Hey,
I'm gonna come up here.
I'm going to interrupt for just, I'm going to interrupt you for just a second. I don't want people to go to the link that I'm going to put in the chat window right now, but I am going to put a link to a tutorial video that Jim has made on our YouTube channel, so folks can bookmark that and come back to it. That will help with walk people through this thing.
No worries, thanks. So I'm just gonna show you how I work through the process of getting data if I'm gonna pull it from the data site. So the first thing I do is I click on this little area data download tool. And then this over here on this side becomes active. But what I find is I need to kind of move things around to get there. I'm going to come out, and I'm gonna zoom in, hopefully on an area that I want to do. And you can scroll in or click in, and we'll zoom into an area around Missoula. Once I clicked on that tool, you notice this little blue dot shows up here. I'll show it there in the bottom, and I can use that to define an area that I want to grab. And it's not, you click once and then you drag the box around the area of interest that you want to get. And then once you selected it, you'll see the grays out over here, but more information becomes available over here on the data download tool. And you can see you can have different methods, a rectangle, a polygon, a previous one, a previous extent, templates, which they can give you, it gives you the ability to go by degrees or atlas of state boundaries or county boundaries. But what I found with this method for developing a constructed landscape file, those extents are typically too large to develop a landscape file that you're going to use in one of the fire modeling systems. So we're instead going to go a rectangle, and I'm just going to redraw it again. And one of the things I want to point out here is about projections. Projections matter in the geospatial arena. All the models, whether you're using them within WFDIS or IFTDIS or FlamMap, require that the landscape have a projection orientation that's with a top north up projection. And the native projection that comes out of LANDFIRE is in a CONUS USGS Albers projection. And I'll show some examples here of what happens with different projections. And that's just the standard select projection, but you have some options. And if you're doing this work for fire modeling, or maybe even for your own modeling, be aware of what this projection does if you're using the CONUS USGS, because it's designed to preserve your data in to be representative of a continental view of the data. If we're using it for projections for intended use in geospatial fire modeling, a major assumption of those models is that your landscape is top oriented to the north. And it's important because it has major impacts on how winds are used within the models. It has impacts on how the fire behavior is calculated because of that. So if you're going for a strict fire behavior usage, always select your best fit UTM. You can define the versions or restrict the versions you want from here. And if you go to here, you can pick which one you want, or you can get to it and limit it. So it makes it easier for you. So I'm interested in fuels. I'm using the most current version. Let's see, did I grab the most current version? Yes, 2.1. I'm going to do fuel capable, and I'm going to take surface and canopy fuels. And I think this has always existed within the LANDFIRE data viewer, even in the older system. But you can either download each data theme independently, or you can get a constructed landscape file. And they offer a constructed landscape file with two different representations of the fire behavior fuel models, one using the Anderson 13 models that were developed in 1982, and one using the current an updated or enhanced set of fuel models developed by Joe Scott and Bob Bergen in 2005. I'm going to select that one. Now at the same time, you can also get each of the individual data themes if you want them, and collect on all of those as well. And if you want topography for the same extent, you have to come down to here and grab if you want the individual data themes, aspect, elevation. We'll grab both of those. Now you just got to put your email in. And download. And it's always good to just double check, make sure you got the right projection, the right data source that you want, and all the themes that you want. And it'll say download, and it'll give you a message about that. And it's been running pretty quick. Eventually it will send an email back to my email that I just told it to go to. It'll provide me a link to download that information. And that link is good for 24 hours, I believe, before it goes away. So with that, that's all you got to do. And you wait for the email to come. And rather than opening my email, we'll just move along there. So the next step I want to do is when you get the data, it creates these zip files that you download, and you have to expand all the zip files to get to the data. I already preloaded and downloaded an area so that we could work with it. And when you expand them, you'll see that here's the LANDFIRE. They all come in folders, and you unzip them. And it gives you, I have more junk in here than what will come with it, but it'll give you this landscape file right here. And the big thing is it'll always come with a projection. And this is in the older format that FlamMap and all the geospatial models use, an LCP format. When you use FlamMap, if I want to load the landscape, we're in FlamMap 6, which is available from the Fire Lab site. And I'm going to load a landscape. I'm going to navigate to where I put the landscape that we downloaded. And this is the landscape that I loaded from the Best Fit UTM for that similar area. And what I want you to notice is how this is kind of rotated. The Best Fit UTM is, what it will do is try to fit it. If it crosses 2 UTM zones, it'll try, the majority of the UTM zone is what will define what UTM zone this landscape is in. In this case, it's in UTM zone 11 North. And you can see that it's rotated about 2 degrees based on that UTM zone. So this brings up an important part. I said earlier that landscapes need to be more north up oriented. In this case, this one is close to being true north oriented, but not quite there. It's about 2 degrees, and you could use it without too much problem. What I want to do though is show you the difference between a Best Fit UTM and the native LANDFIRE CONUS USGS projection. So here is 2 different landscapes. So here's the same area downloaded out of LANDFIRE in 2 different ways with 2 different projections. This is using the native LANDFIRE projection, which is in the CONUS USGS NAD 83 Albers projection, which is rotated over 10 degrees to the east. And here's the UTM coordinate, and it's rotated 2 degrees to the west. Neither one is in a true north up orientation. So within the fire spatial applications, this one would not be very good to use, because what it does is that because of the rotation of the landscape, your wind speed, your wind direction inputs aren't going to be true to the direction that you're entering them in, which could cause problems with the calculation of fire behavior across that landscape. And the same is true with the bottom one here with the with this one, which is best fit UTM, but it's minimized more than if you use this upper landscape. And those cause some problems. So projections matter. Having your data in a localized projection that's appropriate for the scale, the scope, and intent of your application or how you're using the data is important. In this case, this is for illustrative examples of what the extremes might be. There's another way to get data from the LANDFIRE source, and that's using the LANDFIRE products service. And this is a web service that can be used, that they've put together as a service that you can develop into applications to download and access the data through the LANDFIRE products service. Has some information here on how to use it, how you can go through it. There's other sites on the LANDFIRE page of how to use it to incorporate it into an application for you. But there's one way to get it. The difference with how the LANDFIRE products service uses is it creates the data in a localized projection that's totally north up, dependent upon the extent of your landscape, and is probably a better landscape to use in fire modeling. It's why WFDS creates a custom landscape in its application. It's why IFTDIS produces a custom, I'm saying custom landscape, but they develop their landscapes with a custom projection to get around this north or up orientation issue. So on the bottom here, is the USGS projection. On the top is the best fit UTM projection. And now here's a landscape developed for the same extent, but using the LANDFIRE product services. That service develops, like I said, a localized Albers projection in a totally north up orientation, retains the cells in a 30 meters, even though this is 30-meter resolution and that's 30-meter resolution. But here, you're not violating a major assumption of the geospatial modeling systems about how the landscape is oriented when it's calculating fire behavior. And that's an important thing to keep in mind. Both WFDS and IFTDIS account for that. And within FlamMap, we have this utility that's tied directly to the LANDFIRE product service. And you can zoom in, you can get to an area that you want, you can download for a little area, you can define your coordinates up here that if you want to in a WGS84 coordinate system. We have currently these versions of LANDFIRE that you can download depending on where you are and what's available. For version 210, the last time I checked, it was still only for CONUS. Alaska and Hawaii weren't available. And when the new version of LANDFIRE capable fuels comes out, we'll add it as an option here. We've given you some options to download in different raster resolutions in case you want to get it in a different resolution, cell resolution. And once you tell it what you want, where you want it, what resolution you want, you get the landscape button, and we're hitting the landscape, the LANDFIRE product services for this. And it'll run in the background. You'll get some messages as it moves along through its acquisition. All right, and now it's telling me it's available and I can use it. We also have a simple history version that shows you can see all the landscapes and various places and locations I put them in. And you can reload from any one of these if you want to get it again, just by clicking on it, it will load it up into here. use the same extents and everything that you had. I think with that, that was my quick purview of talking about projections, how to get data out of LANDFIRE to use within the modeling systems, but specific to FlamMap. So with that, I guess we can open it to questions.
Chuck, I'll start. This is Jim. Is there something else that we should be doing given the issues that you showed? The best fit UTM sometimes probably goes awry. The landscape service will work, but is there something else that you think we should be doing as a program?
Yeah, sure. What would be good, Jim, I think. So this is the UTM, best fit UTM. And what I think would be great is if the LANDFIRE, if off your data delivery system, you could mimic developing and delivering the landscapes similar to what the LANDFIRE product service uses. So you could still leave best fit UTM up there if you wanted, but from my perspective, having it delivered as in a GeoTIFF file format where everything's together in a single GeoTIFF with all the bands that you need, and it delivered in that localized Albers projection would be better than the UTM. And I say that because you create with the, there's no way around it unless your folks at Arrows could figure out how to fill this landscape in as a square, because expanding out a little bit, making this a total full landscape area full of data rather than this collar around it somehow, if you could do that. Otherwise, I think delivering it in this best fit UTM, this LANDFIRE product service version would be really beneficial.
Okay.
I think. I will say that when I did the data viewer and I downloaded the themes as individual data themes, those all come down from the LANDFIRE data delivery system in a GeoTIFF file format, which is great because we can create a landscape file within FlamMap if you have those individual data themes as GeoTIFFs. You just have to load them individually, which means just navigating to where that file is, and I can load it. And I would just have to do that for each one of these data themes here, for each one of these data themes.
Okay.
And define its units.
Yeah, Randy Swadier, just curious how many people out there have used the new data distribution site. And Chuck, I'm curious as to how well, it's transitioned for you guys from the old one. If you like it better, if it's, if folks are liking it from your part of the world.
For my part of the world, as I use it, I'm fine with using it. I probably more go to how I'm using the data now. I'm trying to use the LANDFIRE product service route to get to the data. I like the GeoTIFF landscape files and how they come down as, as a single file. GeoTIFFs offer like a lot of advantages. They'll smaller file sizes. It's all in one neat package. I can actually bring that landscape file that I create right into GIS, like this is the landscape file that I just showed using the LANDFIRE product service. So that's a GeoTIFF, and it loads it as a multiband GeoTIFF, but you can change the symbology just like you can. I can change the band combinations. You can see all the bands listed. I can actually just turn off a band and apply it. And now I only see the elevation. I was going to show how you can get this into ArcMap or any other GIS system. Because like I can load it here, but if I double click it, I can load any of the bands individually. I'll just, rather than load them all, I'll just load fuel model. And there's the fuel model. So there's a way to get it into GIS fairly simply using the GeoTIFFs.
There was a question earlier from someone about the next data release. And I think we answered it, but I just wanted to make sure that everybody understood. The 5 CONUS geo areas, that's south central, north central, southwest, northwest, and southeast, will be released on July 1 in Alaska. So just wanted to make sure that everybody understood that because we went by it fairly quickly. And the question did come up.
Henry asked, what are your thoughts about working with LANDFIRE and your Get Landscape tool and to develop a GUI?
Well, that tool works well. I like it. I guess would be my thought, but I'm not sure, Henry, that I'm asking exactly what you're getting at.
I think he means for everybody, not just for FlamMap.
Yeah, I'm looking at a little bit more broad, Chuck, to think about how could we think about similar to what's already been stood up in the LANDFIRE product service. It's a pretty great tool, and so what I'm seeing here with the Get Landscape tool, there may be a way to say, hey, how do we structure that within LANDFIRE so people could then do that kind of work, and then also maybe do some other things after that.
Yeah, I mean, sharing always, Henry, we can talk about that. I think what I think would be cool is when you're over in here and you want to download, I want to download a data set, is one of the options is to make it so it delivers the GeoTIFF landscape file rather than to get away from the older style .lcp file formats, is that if you could kind of if you could make it so this site delivered the landscape as a GeoTIFF, just like that Get Landscape tool does, that would be great. So that would be nothing more than just changing the file format you're delivering from here.
Yeah, exactly. There could be some things that could be done on the front end that would make it a little more consumable that way for users like yourself and others.
I'm trying to get away from the older landscape file version and go more to the GeoTIFFs, the GeoTIFF version.
It's great to hear from users like Chuck that are using this interface so that we can sort of, if possible, adapt to meet your needs. And also if it's an easy tweak on our end, it's definitely nice to hear from you so that we can make these LANDFIRE products and data more easily accessible, because that's our overall goal.
And I want to make sure, like on this page here off your main page, you go to data products and you go to here. And then here's where you can get to the services, and the service calls and more of the information about if you're an outside source wanting to use these tools that you guys are developing and how to access them. That information on the landscape file was right there. Kind of talks about what the units are and how they come out, depending on whether you use the 13 or the 40 fuel models. And there's a link to the user's guide if you're on the outside and want to try to incorporate it into your own application.
Look, I have a question, and it's not specifically about the access and the data, but fuels is not my area of expertise by the width of the galaxy. And I'm just kind of interested in your impression of the fuels product itself and how you think it's working, or if you have any suggestions for how we might improve the fuels product. You talked about surface and canopy fuels. So I was kind of interested in what you might think, given that we have a couple of minutes.
Yeah, I think that your overall efforts to go to a capable set of fuels and trying to update that for disturbance is a good step and a good move forward in the right direction. You're trying to incorporate common disturbances and trying to apply your rule sets to these areas, but like it'll always be a chase of trying to get to the most current data. So my suggestion always to everybody is, especially given the scale and scope of the LANDFIRE project. So first off, we couldn't do what we're doing as easily now without LANDFIRE data and to be able to deliver the data this way. But it's still, you still as a user have to look at that data and look at it in the context of your local area and make changes as required, because not all fires will be accounted for. And certainly within a fire season, current disturbance may not be captured in the products that are delivered, from insect outbreaks, the fuels treatments, to even a recent fire within a fire season. I think that with LANDFIRE's data, we couldn't, like I said, we couldn't do what we're doing without it, but it still requires you to look at it as a user from a local perspective, to look at that data and assess that data, and don't be afraid to make changes to the data, right? So that's where I would rest on that.
I appreciate the comments, and I believe that's probably what we've been telling people for a long time. You know, that's what they need to do, and we just have to make sure that that's well understood.
So Chuck, I think you mentioned when LANDFIRE does release, make the new release in June and July, will that data automatically be loaded into FlamMap, or will there be work that you need to do on your end to get it into the system?
The work we need to do is to, because of how we make the options available of data to select from, it's a simple thing to do. I just have to add it into a file to make it available, and to update everyone who's loaded it, it's just trying to get them that updated file. The problem I have with FlamMap and how we deliver it from the Fire Lab webpage is I can't ask you who you are. I can't ask you what your email address is. I can't make you register for anything. So sharing information does become a problem on updates. You know, all I can say is check back to the Fire Lab webpage, which at this point would probably be good if I showed it. And you could spend a day or two or a week just getting around in here. But if you went to apps, products, and you can either scroll down here or just go to fire behavior applications. And here's FlamMap. And if you come down here, there's a whole thing on documents on downloading the software with installation files and all of that. If anybody, as a government agency and entity, I'm restricted on what I can get. So it's hard for me to have mailing lists to send to people with updates. That's a weakness we have. But I will do it as soon as I can. And
we could make an announcement in our monthly LANDFIRE briefs, send out a tweet and things like that when you get that done, to sort of broadcast it as best we can.
Okay.
Yeah, we're thinking about a workaround for you, but we can help advertise that.
That would be great, because how I outreach now is through mainly to fire behavior practitioners through the Lessons Learned Center. I'll put a post out on their Lessons Learned Center to distribute it and make it available, know that it's available. And I'm hoping here by after probably the 3rd week of June, we'll have a full release done. So depending on the timing of your release, it could be rolled up in there, but we'll see how that goes.
Hey,
Sounds
Chuck,
good.
this is Tobin. I had a quick one for you if you got a sec.
Shoot.
Yeah. So I was just kind of chatting with Inga a little bit, and we were looking back and forth with this. Could you go over the multiband TIFF being downloaded from the LANDFIRE product server versus just downloading it from a regular data server? I guess one of the things we were confused about is that I think you said that you were only able to get the GeoTIFF out of the product server, and it could have been that I just wasn't listening very closely.
That you might be able to, at least the way that I'm implementing it here, Tobin, we're constructing a landscape based on what version of LANDFIRE data you give it, and we've chosen to deliver it as a GeoTIFF. I thought in the LANDFIRE product service, I'd have to go back and look, but GeoTIFF is the delivered file format out of that product service unless there's a switch to get the different individual bands or whatever. My goal here was to develop it as a multiband GeoTIFF that could be used in FlamMap. So that's how we've developed it.
Mm-hmm. So when it comes out, it comes out in your altered north up state, correct?
Yes, it comes out in a localized projection based on the extent of the landscape in an NAD 83 Albers projection. So here's the source just like you would see in FlamMap, in ArcMap, right? With all the rows, the columns, the cell size, and its coordinate system.
And currently the only way to do that is through your system in FlamMap 6, right? With your product server.
No, if you're skookum enough and you go to this LANDFIRE, into here and you search through this LANDFIRE users guide, there's ways people could do it using a URL based system.
Oh yeah. Yep.
And get the themes that you want and how you want them.
Okay. And so if you download straight from the data server and you select like your LCP, you can still download the GeoTIFF LCP though, correct?
Sure. Yeah, I was just going to help with a little clarification because I helped kind of build the LANDFIRE product service. I work for the Wildland Fire Management, RDNA, and I do a lot of fire modeling and work with the IFTDIS team and some other applications. And the way we asked for some of the requirements for fire behavior modeling was that the LANDFIRE product service would return a multi-band GeoTIFF with that customized projection, because that's what like the IFTDIS application and the Wildland Fire WFDIS use, but you can specify your own projection. You're not stuck with that, but it does only return multi-band GeoTIFFs. It doesn't return any other format. Like you cannot get an LCP out of the LANDFIRE product service like you can from what Chuck has on the screen now. And part of that was just portability of the files and just knowing that the way the fire modeling world is going is towards those GeoTIFFs instead of LCPs because the files are much smaller and they're easier to pass and use. So I was just going to add that. So they don't match necessarily if you do the same request from, which Chuck was kind of showing, from the LANDFIRE product service using the same bounding box as you would from the data service that's on the screen. Like your landscapes aren't going to be identical. They're probably going to be shifted a little bit. They're going to be slightly, one's going to be true north squared, one's going to have a slight angle like Chuck showed on the screen. So there are some differences between the two. And I also want to say IFTDIS is going to be using the LANDFIRE product service like Chuck's Get landscape tool starting mid-June. So that'll be available in IFTDIS, and then the next gen version of WFDIS is also going to be using that service. So it's starting to get used by applications now that it's out and built, which is great.
So I guess part of, I was probably misstating something. So the old LCPs used to be ASCII and we were like .lcp, and the new landscape files you can download as GeoTIFF, but I think you can still get those from the data service, right?
The data service is the LCP, so that's the old format. You cannot get a multi-band GeoTIFF. You get a whole bunch of TIFFs back. So you, like, if you were to request the 8 bands needed for fire behavior modeling individually, you get 8 TIFFs instead of a multi-band GeoTIFF, or you can request the LCP, and that is the LCP format versus the multi-band GeoTIFF. So what we were asking is it would be great for, instead of that LCP product, to have that returned as a multi-band GeoTIFF. So to kind of move into the future. Sorry, Chuck. Took over.
No.
But I was just thinking I might be able to help clarify, since I was on a lot of the calls early on, helping develop it as well as using. Yeah.
That's all right. That's why I was showing, like, when you add the GeoTIFF theme from here. So like this is you can expand that GeoTIFF, right? So here's the GeoTIFF I downloaded using that get landscape utility out of FlamMap. If you just double click, then you can load all bands, any band you want, and work with them within GIS. That's the beauty of the GeoTIFF coming like that. And you could do the same with out of the data service, right? Which is what I showed. I showed getting the landscape plus the individual data themes you might want. But they're separated, right? The surface and canopy information is listed here, and then the topography information is listed here. And you just have to select those, and they'll come in one giant zip file that you can download.
Alicia, did you have something to add? I saw you unmuted yourself, but I didn't want to leave you out.
Yeah, I was just trying to keep up with Nicole. Nicole, this is Allie. I was trying to, so it sounds like you can download separately the pieces of an LCP as a GeoTIFF, but currently you cannot download the full multiband GeoTIFF. Is that what I'm understanding? Because I saw that when I downloaded something that said LCP for 2021 capable, it got a JSON. I'm just trying to make sure I'm understanding.
Yes. Hey Allie. The GeoJSON file you get defines the bounding box that you requested, and then in the zip folder you get an LCP. If you do that route from the data server that's on Chuck's screen. Versus LANDFIRE product service is a little different.
Here's maybe I should show here. No one look at my email. Here's the message that you get back when you request from using the data service. You get this message that looks like this header right here. And what you were talking about, Allie, was this JSON is just a file that you can use later to extract the same extent over here. But here's a list of everything I downloaded in the demo I was doing. And then here's a link to get that data. And this is the file that I just downloaded. And if you I'll just open it in a new window so you can see what it looks like. It has the folders with the landscape and every one of the individual data themes that I requested. So does that help, Ellie?
It does a little bit. Let me play with it a couple days and then come to the next LANDFIRE office hours with more questions.
I'd say too, if you request it that way, then like in FlamMap, you'd have to build your landscape using those individual files versus using what Chuck showed with his get landscape tool. That just grabs something that you can use, or if you grabbed an LCP from the data server instead of the individual layers, that would also work directly in FlamMap without any extra work.
So here's the file I just downloaded. So I'm going to load, Allie, the landscape that I just grabbed from the data delivery system. And I navigate to the folder because when you extract it, it will have that in it. Here's the area I extracted. Within FlamMap, there's a utility called Convert LCP to GeoTIFF. And if I navigate to where that landscape came from, and I open it, and I don't even have to define the projection, because when you download that from here, you get a projection file that comes with that landscape. And then I'm just going to say, and now that landscape's a GeoTIFF, 8-band GeoTIFF. And now that landscape's a GeoTIFF, 8-band GeoTIFF, created, and it will have, and here it is in the folder. So it's easy enough to convert the landscape file you get from the data delivery system into a GeoTIFF format, but you still have to deal with the projection issues if you're not careful on how you define the map datum and projection you wanted.